December 1944. The Ardennes is dark, frozen, and full of men who think the Americans are breaking. A German assault column moves through the trees in white camouflage capes, boots sinking into snow, rifles held high to keep them dry. Ahead of them, an American listening post goes silent. Too silent, a flare rises. For 1 second, the forest is silver. Then it disappears again. A German lieutenant smiles. The ridge is open. 300 yards away, an American forward observer presses a field telephone into his ear and hears only static. Behind him, somewhere in the black timber, an artillery battery is waiting for coordinates that have not come yet. The Germans keep moving. No machine gun wall, no immediate barrage, no sign of the heavy answer they expected. Then the first shell bursts above the trees. Not on the ground, above them. Snow, bark and steel rain down together, and nobody in the German column understands what just happened. By the time this night begins, Germany has already seized the first shock of the Ardennes offensive. Roads are clogged, American units are split. Entire headquarters are struggling to understand what is happening. In some sectors, German forces have torn openings through the line quickly enough to make officers think the old momentum is back. That feeling matters. It makes men impatient. It makes them believe the next ridge will break as easily as the last one. Hauptmann Karl Brenner has reason to believe it too. His battalion has been moving west, through snow and dark for hours, stepping around wrecked trucks, frozen shell holes, and stunned American outposts that seemed to fold before the full weight of the attack even arrived. He has seen confusion in the enemy line. He has smelled it. Tonight he wants to turn that confusion into collapse. Lieutenant Jack Rowan, crouched on a slope below a stand of shattered pines, sees something different. He sees headlights covered in cloth. He sees silhouettes moving low through the trees. He sees the kind of patient advance that means this is not another wandering patrol. This is a full push. Rowan is not a frontline infantry officer. He is artillery. His job is to stay close enough to the front to see what should be hit, and far enough back to live long enough to call it in. Tonight, that distance feels very small. Half a mile behind him, in a muddy gun position disguised with netting and pine boughs, Staff Sergeant Eddie Navarro stands beside his 105mm howitzer and waits. The crew has already fired enough in the last 2 days to feel the war in their shoulders. But Eddie knows something the Germans do not. Tonight, stacked beside the standard shells, there are new fuses in separate boxes. Boxes nobody talks about loudly. The battery commander called them special issue. The men in the gun pits call them something else, the whisper shells. Nobody in Eddie's section was given a speech. No officer stood on an ammo crate and explained how history was changing. The instructions were simple. Handle them carefully. Keep them separate. Do not discuss them over open lines. Use them only when ordered. That kind of secrecy always makes soldiers curious. But curiosity is a luxury in artillery. The gun crew's real questions are smaller. How many rounds tonight? How fast? At what range? Will the Germans reach the road before we stop them? Karl Brenner believes the Americans are thin here. Not absent. Not harmless. Just thin. He has already seen what American artillery can do in daylight, when the roads are marked and the batteries have time to settle. But this is forest. Cold. Night. Pressure. The offensive has ripped enough holes elsewhere to make him think the defenders are disorganized. He wants speed more than elegance. That is always the temptation in a breakthrough. When the first resistance bends, commanders begin rushing the second. Behind Brenner walks Lieutenant Otto Weiss, the battalion intelligence officer. He is younger than he wants to seem and more observant than his superiors like to admit. Otto notices details other men dismiss. Empty American ration tins still warm to the touch, telephone wire cut recently, not days ago. A machine gun nest abandoned in too much hurry. To Brenner, these details mean retreat. To Otto, they mean someone is delaying with purpose. On the American side, Rowan finally gets the line alive again. Crowfoot 2, this is Able Red. I have movement, large movement. Grid coming. He says it fast, because a man 10 yards away has just vanished into the brush, and he cannot tell if it was a messenger or a German scout. The battery command post repeats the grid. Eddie hears the numbers before he hears the order. That is how artillery works in battle. The coordinates arrive before the emotion does. Battery adjust. HE. 1 gun. Standard high explosive first. Standard procedure first. War likes routine, because routine makes men useful, while fear is trying to make them stupid. The first ranging round lands low and left. Brenner sees the flash on the forest floor and grins. Too late. Too low. Good. The Americans are reacting, not controlling. Otto does not grin. He marks where the round landed and notices something else. The Americans fired fast. Faster than a scattered force should have fired at night. Rowan adjusts. Drop 100. Right 50. Fire for effect pending. A tree branch above him cracks and falls inches from his shoulder, not from shellfire but from frost and vibration. The whole forest feels brittle enough to shatter if touched. Eddie's crew works like men feeding a furnace. Shell lifted. Rammed. Breech shut. Deflection corrected. Powder bag checked. Fire. The gun recoils. Snow slides off the camouflage net in white dust. This time, the shells land inside the German advance. Men go down. The line hesitates. Then it moves again. Brenner waves them forward. He has seen worse. The Germans are not careless. That is important. They spread, use folds in ground, move from tree to tree, and keep the pressure on, because they know American artillery becomes more dangerous the longer it is allowed to settle. The answer is not to freeze. The answer is to get underneath it. Rowan watches them do exactly that. The pattern is familiar. Smart infantry does not run from shellfire in a straight line. It keeps slipping through the spaces between impacts until the gun crews are forced to chase, and chasing wastes time. He asks for smoke on one flank, HE on the other, and keeps talking because the line keeps breathing in and out like a living thing. Inside the battery command post, Captain Miles Greeley studies the reports and makes a decision he knew he might have to make before dawn. He lifts one of the sealed fuse boxes and opens it himself. Not because the men cannot, because he wants to feel the weight of the choice. The round looks ordinary enough. The same shell body, the same business end of a battlefield answer. The difference is inside the fuse. And tonight, that hidden difference is going to matter more than the gun. Eddie sees Greeley come out with the box and knows the battle has changed. Special issue. No explanation. Just a short order. Set VT. Battery fire when called. Most of the crew do not know what the letters stand for. They know only that the battery commander's voice got quieter when he said them. Brenner's men hit the first American fallback position and find foxholes, discarded radio wire, 2 dead telephone linemen, and nothing else. No big stand. No desperate last-minute firefight. Only absence. That makes Brenner even more certain he is pushing through a weak seam. Otto kneels beside one of the cut field telephones and touches the receiver. Still warm. He looks up into the dark trees and feels, for the first time that night, that they are being shaped rather than resisted. The next barrage answers him. It does not burst on the ground. It bursts in the air over the column. The effect is wrong. Wrong for mortar fire. Wrong for badly cut timed fuses. Wrong for anything Otto has seen in a forest fight. The shell goes off above them, and the fragments come down at angles the men cannot shield against. A sergeant drops into the snow clutching his helmet with both hands, not because he has been hit badly, but because every instinct says danger should come from ahead, not from the dark above the pines. Brenner shouts for the men to keep moving. He assumes the Americans have simply guessed the right tree line. Good gunnery, nothing more. He does not yet understand that the Americans no longer need the shell to hit the ground near him. Eddie's gun is now firing a weapon the Germans cannot read by sound alone. The crew notices the difference immediately in the observer's corrections. Less chasing, more confidence. The rounds do not need to walk all the way into exact Earth coordinates. They only need to arrive near men. The sky does the rest. Rowan hears the effect through the phone before he fully sees it. A line of Germans that had kept slipping through the gaps is suddenly flattening, stalling, bunching behind trunks, and trying to solve a problem the ground cannot solve for them. He says one thing into the handset. Keep that fuse. American infantry hugging the ridge hear the same strange rhythm. They are used to shells slamming into earth and throwing dirt forward. These new bursts crack overhead, like invisible tripwires snapping in the sky. Even the Americans glance up the first few times. A rifle squad leader named Tommy Bell, half frozen and half asleep before the attack began, turns to the man beside him and says, "That ain't normal." He means it as praise. Otto Weiss says the same thing for a different reason. He has no name for what is happening yet, but he knows ordinary artillery does not keep finding men under tree cover this way. The bursts are too high, too consistent, too efficient, against men who thought the forest itself was part of their protection. The attack pauses, only for a minute, but in battles like this, a minute is space, and space is oxygen. Brenner uses the pause the way competent officers do. Runners to the flanks, machine guns forward. Mortars up. He intends to hit the ridge harder, not retreat from it. The Americans have one clever trick, or one well-plotted battery. Fine. Tricks exhaust themselves. He believes aggression is still the safer choice. Miles Greeley believes the opposite. He knows what he is firing. He also knows why it has been kept secret. If the Germans get an intact example and understand it early, the advantage shrinks. If they do not, the confusion grows with every burst. His job tonight is not only to stop the attack, it is to stop it without gifting the explanation. That is why American crews had been warned not to speak casually. Not because soldiers gossip, because intelligence travels in fragments long before whole truths arrive. The Germans attack again. This time, they spread wider and try to use the reverse slope, thinking the American observer may lose them as they dip away from the first line of sight. It would have worked better against ordinary fuses. Rowan spots movement only briefly through a split in the trees and gives the grid almost by instinct. He does not need a direct strike. He needs the rounds over them. The barrage opens. Airbursts over the reverse slope. Airbursts over the pines. Airbursts over men who thought they were in the dead ground below the American line. A German platoon that had been moving with discipline breaks into smaller, frightened movements, each soldier trusting a different tree, ditch, or depression. The shells punish all three. Brenner feels the night slipping sideways, not lost yet, just less honest than it had felt 20 minutes earlier. Eddie Navarro is too busy to admire the effect. Load, fire, traverse. Correct. The gun pit is a place of heat and iron in a frozen forest. Sweat freezes on collars. Hands go numb and then burn back to life around metal tools. Every man there is aware of the battery's position being compromised with every salvo. The Germans are not the only ones living on borrowed time. Tommy Bell and his riflemen finally see shapes in front of them again. Not charging now. Creeping. Feeling forward after the bursts, trying to regain nerve and spacing. Tommy lets them come close enough to prove they are not stumps or shadows, and then fires one hard volley. The ridge wakes up all at once. American machine guns open. German rifles answer. Tracers cut low through the trees. For 30 seconds, the battle stops being about the hidden weapon and becomes what men always imagine war is. Flashes, muzzle fire, shouting, snow kicked up by bullets. Then the artillery returns and reminds everyone that the battlefield has a second layer tonight. Otto finds a fragment lodged in a tree trunk shoulder high. That detail stays with him. A ground burst would have marked lower, differently, more forward. This piece came down. He looks into the branches above and understands at least this much. Whatever the Americans are using, it is defeating cover by refusing to respect the ground. Back at battalion level, Brenner sends word that the American artillery is using unusual burst patterns. The reply that comes back is what officers often receive in the middle of offensives. Keep attacking. There is no hidden wisdom in that order, only urgency. The German offensive depends on movement. The longer an attack stalls in front of a ridge, the more every other delay grows teeth. Greeley changes one battery to smoke and keeps the others on VT high explosive. Not enough smoke to hide the whole ridge, just enough to blur the American line and make the Germans guess where the infantry is thinner. Let them choose the wrong patch of ground. They do. A company-sized push forms against a section that looks weak in the smoke. It is weak. That part is true. But the battery has already ranged the slope in front of it. Rowan waits until he sees the dark cluster commit. Then he gives the coordinates. No dramatic words. No speech. Just numbers that turn men half a mile away into the deciding edge. The shells arrive over the attackers before the first wave can hit the wire. Airbursts over a packed assault group in winter trees create a particular kind of panic. Men cannot tell whether lying down saves them or only pins them under falling steel. Orders blur. Momentum dies in place. What had looked like a breakthrough lane becomes a trap full of hesitation. Tommy Bell sees the attack fold and does not cheer. He knows enough now to distrust early relief. The Germans have come in too hard tonight to stop after one broken push. He is right. Brenner adjusts again. Mortars first, then assault groups in smaller packets, then an armored push if the road can be cleared. He refuses to believe one artillery gimmick should be enough to stop a determined battalion. That refusal is bravery in one light, stubbornness in another. Otto begins collecting details like a man building a case no one asked him to build. Burst height, angle of fragment strikes, effect under trees, effect behind embankments. The Americans are not simply firing more accurately. The shells themselves are behaving differently. That thought disturbs him because it implies something worse than good gunnery. It implies a hidden battlefield advantage he cannot counter with fieldcraft alone. Rowan loses his phone line again, this time for good. A burst somewhere behind him slices the wire, or buries it, or tears the post entirely out of frozen ground. It does not matter which. The effect is the same. He is suddenly an observer without a voice. For 5 seconds, the ridge feels naked. Then he grabs the emergency radio. The set is temperamental in this weather, heavy to move, and never as clear as men promise in training. He gets it working on the second try. The first thing he hears is Eddie's battery checking in. That small human sound, a familiar American voice asking for fire correction, steadies him more than the ridgeline itself. Sometimes a battle turns, because one system survives the minute another fails. Brenner's mortars begin finding the American front. Bell's platoon takes hits. A bar gunner goes silent. A runner from the company commander arrives with a message that is half snow and half breath. Hold until first light, no matter what. No infantryman likes hearing, no matter what. It means somebody behind you is less mobile than you are. That somebody, tonight, is the artillery. If the ridge gives too quickly, the gun line dies. Everyone up front understands that without saying it. Eddie's crew hears incoming rounds getting closer. Enemy mortars are walking toward the battery position now. That means the Germans either guessed well, or someone forward has finally marked the flashes. The gun line has been invisible long enough. One round lands near the ammunition pit and throws snow across the stack of spare charges. No fire, no catastrophe. But the crewmen all look at one another for a split second and see the same truth. The battery is in the battle now, not behind it. Greeley orders displacement prep for one section and refuses to move the rest. If they all pull out now, the ridge loses the only thing the Germans still truly fear. The men obey because there is nothing else to do. Otto sees the American answer weakening in one sector and tells Brenner they may finally have the seam. Brenner nods and commits the reserve company. This is the push he will later remember as the one that almost worked. It almost does. The Germans get closer than before. Bell's left flank folds back 30 yards. An American squad loses its sergeant and starts drifting without shape. 2 Germans reach the first belt of wire. One cuts into it before rifle fire takes him down. Rowan cannot see the whole gap through the smoke and trees. He can see enough. He calls danger close and gives the grid anyway. There are moments when artillery officers stop calculating clean survival and start calculating acceptable damage. This is one of them. Greeley hears the request and does not repeat it back for debate. He just says, battery, VT, fire. Eddie's crew works faster than sense. Ram, shut, fire. The tubes flash almost together. The men flinch every time, even though they are trained not to. The shells burst above the gap. Not in it, above it. Over Germans who are already inside the American danger zone, and over Americans who are forced flat under the same falling storm. Bell feels fragments and bark spray the snow in front of his face, and does not know if the next second belongs to his side or the enemy. When the smoke clears enough to see, the push is gone, not erased. Broken. Men still move, some forward, some back, but the assault has lost its shape, and in infantry battle, shape is everything. Brenner stares through field glasses and realizes the Americans have just dropped artillery over their own threatened line with a precision he did not think any army in this weather could manage. That is the moment his confidence in a quick night victory finally cracks. Otto's suspicion becomes certainty. This is not normal artillery timing. This is not guesswork. This is not luck. The Americans have something in the fuse. He cannot prove it yet. He cannot name it yet. But once the thought exists, it explains too many strange details too neatly to ignore. On the ridge, Bell drags one wounded rifleman into a shallower scrape and looks toward the rear, toward guns he cannot see and crews he does not know. He says, "Do it again," like a prayer and an insult at the same time. The battery does. The next series of bursts lands farther back, in the assembly ground where Brenner had been preparing the reserve. Even the men who have not yet moved forward are now catching steel from above. That is when the attack stops feeling offensive. It starts feeling exposed. For a German officer, that is one of the worst battlefield sensations there is. Not simply taking fire before you have even fully entered the phase of the battle you meant to control. Brenner shifts to local objectives. No more bold talk of punching through by dawn. Now he wants the tree line, the road bend, the knoll. Smaller goals are a commander's way of hiding from the death of the larger one. The Americans do the opposite. They stop thinking locally the moment they sense the German tempo slowing. A ridge held until dawn is no longer just a ridge. It becomes a failed timetable. A failed timetable becomes a failed day. A failed day in the Ardennes becomes something bigger than the men freezing on one hill know in the moment. Eddie's number 2 gun jams on extraction. For 10 terrifying seconds, the crew thinks the piece is out of the fight. A loader and the section chief fight the casing together with gloved hands and a steel pry. It comes free. No cheer, just the next round. The special fuses keep working. That is the part Otto cannot get over. Weapons usually reveal themselves through noise, flash, or shape. This one looks ordinary on departure, and only changes the war in the last instant before impact. It is a battlefield secret that hides in plain sight. A German runner reaches battalion with a report that the Americans are using air explosions over cover. Someone at the rear writes it down as if the words themselves explain enough. They do not. Rowan moves 50 yards right because the Germans have started looking for his radio transmissions. He is no hero in the way posters draw heroes. He is cold, angry, and practical. He slides into another shell scrape, brushes snow off the radio set, and keeps talking men onto coordinates. War rewards glamorous speeches less often than it rewards refusing to stop the unpleasant work. Bell's platoon is now down enough men that every rifle matters. He shifts one private to watch dead ground that should have held 3 men. He puts another on spare grenades. He does the arithmetic all small unit leaders hate. What is left? Where can it still matter? How long before the line turns symbolic instead of useful? The artillery keeps that arithmetic from going bad. That is the true emotional power of a hidden battlefield weapon. Men at the front stop feeling abandoned to their own numbers. Brenner makes one last determined effort before dawn, this time with mortar concentration, machine gun suppression, and a narrow thrust through a fold in the slope where the Americans seem least able to observe. It is the best attack plan of the night. It still runs into the same answer. Rowan sees only flickers of movement and still trusts the pattern enough to call the fire. That trust would have looked insane an hour earlier. Now it looks like professional confidence. The VT shells burst above the fold, above the blind approach. Above the line the Germans had chosen precisely because ground-burst artillery should have been less effective there. Men do not vanish. They collapse into hesitation. They stop rising together. The assault dies standing half-assembled. Otto sees it happen and feels something close to intellectual defeat before physical defeat. The Americans have turned terrain against the attacker by changing what a shell means. Greeley finally allows one thought to surface. If this gets out too early, every army in the world will want it. Then he buries the thought again, because dawn is still far enough away for men to die stupidly. Eddie's gun line is almost out of the first allotment of the special fuses. That fact adds urgency to every order now. Hidden weapons are still limited by trucks, crates, mud, and numbers. The crew begins mixing standard HE back in between VT rounds, and the difference is immediately felt by the observer. The standard shells punish. The VT rounds unmake confidence. That is the distinction that will stay with the Germans after capture. Not just that American artillery was heavy, That one kind of American shell seemed to reach behind the normal logic of cover. Bell hears fewer German voices ahead. Not none, just fewer. That change is enough to make the ridge feel survivable again. Brenner hears the same silence and hates it for the opposite reason. Silence in attack often means men are still there but no longer willing to move on time. He goes forward personally to restart them. That choice is brave and almost fatal. A burst overhead throws fragments through the trunks above his group. Brenner is knocked flat, half deaf, and pulled into a ditch by a corporal who no longer cares what plan was written 2 hours ago. The battalion commander has now learned the hidden weapon physically. Otto helps drag him back and notices the wounds are not from a shell landing near the ditch. They are from something that opened over it. That detail settles the matter in his mind. This is engineered. Dawn begins to thin the dark by degrees no exhausted man trusts at first. Shapes become less mythical. Roads reappear. Tree lines stop floating. And with dawn comes the one thing the Germans cannot afford after a failed night breakthrough. American observation improves. Rowan sees farther now. The hidden weapon had bought the night. The day is going to make the bill larger. He starts marking withdrawal paths, assembly hollows, and a machine gun position the Germans had kept cleverly masked for hours. In full light, it looks almost laughably vulnerable. That is how battles turn. A position can be dangerous in darkness and obvious in morning without changing a single log or branch. Eddie's battery shifts to ordinary destructive fire where needed. The special rounds are lower now, but the work they had to do is already done. The German attack no longer has the moral momentum to exploit ground quickly enough. Brenner, shaken and angry, orders a disengagement to reorganize. He does not call it retreat. Officers almost never do in the moment. But the men moving back through the timber know what they are doing. The ridge was not taken. The line was not broken. The night did not save them. Otto walks among the withdrawing men and sees what the hidden weapon actually accomplished. Not piles of dramatic ruin. Something more militarily important. Interrupted timing. Broken spacing. Lost nerve in the assault phase. Cover rendered unreliable. That is the kind of battlefield effect officers remember long after specific shell counts are forgotten. American infantry on the ridge do not celebrate. They are too cold, too tired, and too aware the day may bring another attempt. Bell lights a cigarette with shaking hands, shares it twice, and looks at the slope where the Germans almost came through. He knows perfectly well that without the battery, his platoon would be somewhere behind the next road, or nowhere at all. Rowan finally reaches the battery position in person after the lines settle enough. He finds Eddie and the gun crews coated in soot, mud, and frost. And for a moment, nobody says anything noble. They are just relieved to see one another alive. Then Rowan points at the opened fuse crates. So that's what they gave us. Eddie only shrugs. Worked. It worked so well that the secrecy around it almost feels absurd from inside the battlefield. But secrecy made sense. If the Germans understood too quickly, they would spread out differently, seek hard overhead cover sooner, salvage fragments more carefully, and pass warnings up the chain before the next battle. War is a race between weapon and explanation. Tonight, explanation lost. 2 days later, Otto Weiss sits under guard in a farmhouse, being used as a temporary interrogation point. He is tired, irritated, and trying not to show curiosity, because curiosity in prisoners is often misread as weakness. Across the room, American officers sort captured maps, papers, and personal weapons on a long table. One of them sets down a fuse casing fragment. Otto cannot stop looking at it. An American ordnance lieutenant notices. Seen one before? Otto says nothing. The lieutenant turns the fragment in his hand. Most of them haven't. The American does not deliver a speech. He talks to another officer, half to himself, half out loud, in the careless tone men use when they assume the prisoner will not understand every word. Radio proximity. Airburst. Much better in trees. Otto understands enough English. Enough, certainly, to feel the whole night reorder itself in his head. Not better gunnery alone. Not lucky timed fire. Not guesswork. A shell designed to know when it was close. The realization is worse in a warm room than it had been under fire. Because under fire, there is always noise to hide behind. Afterward, there is only structure. Otto begins reviewing the night the way professionals always do, once they are allowed the misery of hindsight. The reverse slope, the tree bursts, the failure of ditches to protect, the attacks that stalled before contact, the overhead fragmentation patterns, the confidence that had evaporated for reasons no one could name in the dark. Now it all fits. And what fits most painfully is this. The Americans did not only possess a stronger weapon, they possessed it secretly, at the exact stage of the war when German officers were already fighting, with too little margin for new surprises. At the front, Bell's platoon rotates off the ridge. The men leaving do not talk much. Exhaustion flattens language. Yet one private says something Bell remembers for years. Those shells made the trees fight for us. Bell does not correct him. He knows what the man means. Eddie's battery receives a fresh ammunition truck in sleet. Among the standard rounds are more of the separate boxes, still uncelebrated, still handled quietly. War keeps moving even after a small miracle. Rowan writes the night into his field notes, with the plainness artillerymen prefer. Enemy attack heavy, ridge nearly penetrated, VT highly effective in woods and reverse slope. Friendly infantry held, no adjectives. History would later want adjectives. The men there mostly wanted more ammunition and dry socks. Otto's interrogator eventually asks him a simple question. What stopped your attack? It is the kind of question that invites flattery or ideology. Otto gives neither. He says, after a pause, your shells made the ground meaningless. The American officer writes that down. He may or may not fully appreciate it, but Otto means every word. German officers had learned their battlefield logic through years of war. You survive artillery by reading the terrain correctly. Reverse slopes, tree lines, dugouts, folds in ground, movement intervals, covered approaches, all of it still mattered against ordinary fire. The hidden American weapon had not erased that logic entirely. It had bent it, bent enough to break an attack in the dark. That is the difference between a useful new weapon and a battle-changing one. A useful new weapon kills more efficiently. A battle-changing one alters what trained officers think counts as protection. Brenner survives his wound and never fully forgives the battle for how it turned. He had expected the Americans to crack under pressure and confusion, the way many armies do in winter surprise offensives. Instead, he found an enemy that, once it gathered itself, answered with something both practical and unnerving. An ordinary artillery arm hiding an extraordinary shell. He would later describe the night as if the Americans had learned how to fire into the sky above men rather than at the earth beneath them. That was close enough. For the Americans, the weapon remained only one piece of superiority. Guns still had to be placed. Observers still had to live long enough to call the grids. Crews still had to load in darkness. Lines still had to hold while the fire took effect. No shell wins a battle alone. But some shells make holding possible where holding would otherwise fail. And that is exactly what happened on the ridge. The Germans were not routed by panic. They were slowed, broken up, and stripped of attack rhythm by a weapon that kept turning cover into exposure. That is how a battlefield changes hands, without the men on one side fully understanding why, until later. Otto is eventually moved farther to the rear with other prisoners. On the truck ride, another captured officer asks what he thinks happened. Otto looks out at the winter woods and answers quietly, "We attacked a battery we thought we understood." That sentence contains the whole defeat. Not misunderstood Americans, misunderstood the weapon. That distinction matters, because armies can recover from meeting brave men. Recovering from meeting a new physical rule of the battlefield is harder. By the time the Ardennes fighting fully turns, larger forces and larger decisions will dominate the story. Fuel, weather, roads, air power, reserves, command failures, command recoveries, all of that matters. But on one winter ridge, in one dark slice of the battle, captured German officers learned what modern war is really like. You can be looking at the correct gun and still not know what the real weapon is. The gun was familiar. The crew drills were familiar. The sound was familiar. Only the final behavior of the shell was new. That is why the secret held so long. Novelty disguised as routine is one of the deadliest things any army can field. Bell later says, the night never felt heroic to him. It felt cold, confused, and far too close. That is probably the most honest thing anyone can say about holding a line under artillery support. Heroism is often what later audiences call the experience after the people inside it have finished surviving. Eddie remembers the separate fuse boxes. Rowan remembers the voice on the radio getting steadier as the effect became obvious. Otto remembers fragments coming down from above when all his training told him the danger should have come from ahead. Brenner remembers the attack almost working, right before it stopped making sense. Each man carries a different version of the same weapon. The Americans had many strengths in 1944. Numbers, fuel, motor transport, gunnery, air support, replacement systems. But in that snowbound patch of forest, none of those abstractions mattered as immediately as one hidden battlefield weapon did. Not because it was louder, because it changed what every officer thought the trees were for. So when captured German officers later tried to explain why some American ridge positions had held when they should have been smashed by surprise and pressure, the answer was not only courage. It was not only artillery concentration. It was not only timing. It was that the Americans had brought a shell to the battlefield that exploded before touching the ground and turned winter cover into a liability. That was the realization. The hidden American weapon was not a bigger gun no one had seen. It was an ordinary gun firing something the battlefield had never felt before. And by the time German officers understood it, the night that might have broken the ridge was already gone. The shells had burst above them. The attacks had slowed below them. The line had held. And afterward, in captivity, the officers finally found the right question. Not why the Americans kept firing so fast, why the ground had stopped protecting them. That was when they understood. The most dangerous American weapon that night was the one they never